Hi, I'm Tim O'Neill, and this is my shop. This is a 1989 Volkswagen Rally Golf, the one that won the 1990 Mount Washington Auto Road. And at the time, it had mostly stock drivetrain, a Group N car, we would call it, production-based car. And I had raced this car for a number of years. And I had gotten Lehman engines from Austria, which Volkswagen Germany provided me with engines, with ECUs, with really good superchargers, but they could not ever get me the proper Group A drivetrains. So we had a lot of axles breaking, transmissions breaking, everything broke because they had more horsepower than the driveline could handle, and I couldn't get my hands on the driveline. Well, now it's almost 35 years later, and I finally found my car with all that drivetrain. The two other people that own this car collected those parts over the last 30 years. And now I have my car, my old car, with all the proper Group A parts that don't break, proper engine. I've been holding on to an engine for years and years, protecting it, almost putting it under my pillow, keeping it safe until now I finally have a use for it. So I got my old Rally Golf back. I waited 30 years to get all the parts in the car, and so now I have two Rally Golfs, the totally standard red one and this one, which is a Group A car. And my intention is to put it back to Group A spec, to test it and develop this further. The problem with the Volkswagen, when they raced these cars, they made 12 of them. They ran them for a little while and then they withdrew from the program. So they never finished developing the car. So as a challenge, I like to do things where I can figure out what would it be like if you had enough time and energy, you could make pretty much anything a reliable rally car. One of the reasons I had to sell this car, and the reason I got it back, is I regretted selling the car. I was in business and I had my regular workshop when I was racing, and that's how I made my money as a mechanic. And I finally got worn out the first time for being a mechanic and a business owner, and decided to sell everything and pay off my debts that I had acquired from racing. And typically that's what we did back in the day. Was we couldn't afford to go racing. We had a workshop. We'd go racing, we'd spend all our money, run our credit cards up, and at the end of the year, you'd sell your car and pay off all your debt. So I never kept my cars because I had to sell them to pay for the debt from having raced them. The big question is, how will this car do compared to other vehicles? We don't know. I don't know. It was never fully developed. There was some mechanical problems. Do I think the synchro drive with the supercharger with a 2,800-pound vehicle? It seems to me that once we work out the bugs and develop the suspension and the electrics better, because remember, back in the day, the computing wasn't that good, so there was no standalone system. You couldn't get in and hook your laptop up to the system and tune it. It was whatever the Germans made, the computer chip was put in, they'd epoxy over the computer chips. You couldn't mess with it. Now, we have a Haltech system that we buy standalone, and that's why all the wires are hanging, because we're hooking up this system, and hopefully this week we'll be able to have a much better electronics package, better sensors. Everything is better on the electrics. The suspension, I'm going to be running a ProFlex suspension, which is much better than the Sachs that I had. The clutch that we run is a much better, much stronger clutch, even though we didn't really have clutch problems. The fluids, like synthetic fluids, are better. There's just so many little things that are better. The plan is to be ready for LSPR this year. And if you got to set a date, you got to commit. If you say, well, if it is, it is. No, let's make it happen. And it may be that 2 days before it's time to load up, the car's not ready and I will withdraw. Okay, so some of the things that we did with the original Rally Golf, we actually put a hood prop instead of the thing, piston. No, some of the things. The engine is a Lehman engine, comes from Austria. Volkswagen and Audi always had a guy named Lehman build their engines. So I've always had a good source of really powerful engines. They have about 295 horsepower back in the day. 295 horsepower was a pretty good number for Group A cars, especially because they all weighed about 2,800 pounds, 2,700 pounds. This one was supercharged with the G ladder. So the supercharger, having a supercharged street car was kind of a new thing. And having the G60, the G ladder, was a scroll type of system, which was quite unique for superchargers too. So there was a lot of unique things. And these things, this supercharger is a Group A one, modified by the Germans back in the old days. I'm hoping that this is going to be a reliable unit. I also have another one being built with a similar wide belt by BBM. And these guys specialize in making superchargers for Corrados. So I'm using a lot of the technology that's happened since the last 30 years. We don't have rally golfs, but we have Corrados. And there's a bunch of guys that race Corrados and that are drag racing and modifying Corrados. So there has been development on the superchargers and on this engine since I ran these cars. So I'm hoping that I can rely on some of that development over the past 30 years. So maybe the engine is a Lehman engine, but the supercharger and the ECU, the ignition system, the sensors, all of that has been updated. And then even things like the intercooler back in the day, this is like the biggest intercooler I've ever seen. It goes in front of the radiator. These were really hard to find back in the day. Well, apparently somebody's making them, and you can buy them online. You can buy an intercooler, you can buy a radiator. There's a bunch of stuff that I was surprised that they still had, because they used some things from the rally golf on the Corrado. And the Corrado guys kept this alive, kind of. So fortunately, the Corrado freaks out there are helping me by still buying parts that are from a rally golf. There was some other stuff. The rally golf had special headlights, special radiator, special grill. There's a lot of, the headlights were really cool because remember, this is a rally golf. They built 5,000 of them for the intention of rallying. So when you look at the way the high beam and the low beam works, they really look like rally headlights. You can actually race this thing without any auxiliary driving lights if you had to. The rally golf also had a number of cool things, like it had increased suspension travel. It had a stiffer steering rack, so it gave you a better feel. It wasn't light like a regular golf. The rally golf used the different gearbox, much stronger gearbox. This same gearbox is now being used on all Volkswagens to this day. So there was a lot of new development on the rally golf. And that's where I feel that Volkswagen Motorsport utilized a lot of these new technologies, and then they realized that there was something better, the turbo with a different drivetrain. So they left this and went on to the next thing. And I think it was partially Volkswagen corporate in Germany saying, we don't want to sell superchargers. They might have said, turbo's the way to go. It might have been because the cars didn't win right away in the rally, and they said, you know what, we'd like to win. We don't want that car to be seen because it's not developed. There's a lot of reasons why I think it could have been why this car was never fully developed, but it was the kind of vehicle that they tried new things and learned enough on it to know what direction they wanted to go in. As you know, 10 years ago, Volkswagen was winning the World Championship. So they did learn something from using this. They just never fully developed it. One of the other cool things about this car is it has the original Motorsport instrument cluster. And as maybe a historical person, I'm very impressed with how the Germans laid out their gauges in their dash. When you look at old Audis and old Volkswagens of the day, there were aviation all over this thing. So the wiring and the dash and the instrument cluster was really developed by the Germans. The other car that I have, the other Volkswagen rally car, I think is even going to have a cooler version of that. We also have a really good, Volkswagen Motorsport has a special shifter that works for the dog box. It's a reverse lockout. It's kind of a pain when you have to go to reverse. You're going to have two hands to make it go in reverse. The fuel system, the fuel cell is something that I did back in the day that I wanted to mount because it's all-wheel drive and there was really no room in the back for a fuel tank. I wanted it centered in the car. So mounting the fuel system in the center was, I think, a benefit for safety as well. They also went and did the dual fuel pump and dual fuel filter, so we have essentially two fuel systems on this car. Even though the pickup was one single pickup, they make it like that because in the day, contaminated fuel was an issue, and sometimes you'd plug a fuel filter. With this one here, if it starts to die out and you sense low fuel pressure, you just turn on the other pump. And so we have two fuel pumps and two fuel filters. Also, one of the rules back in the day was if you're going to have a fuel tank inside, you need to have a very secure way of filling it. So you couldn't use just a rubber hose. You couldn't fill inside the car. Some of these cars now, you got to open the car and fill it from inside, which could be a problem at times of fuel spill. So I used, back in the day, I found Aircraft Supply, and I found one of the world's biggest fuel lines. It probably cost me way more than I want to admit. So this was just something that was really early on that I did because the rules had changed. Another thing that's happened, the rules have changed. It's been so long, the cage is now out of date. The roll cage is not legal to race in now. So we have to cut the cage out and build a new roll cage. This was the old viscous coupling on the original diff I had, which was terrible. Now they've bypassed that. Now it's the straight up synchro drive. Inside here is where the limited slip plates are. So this is a cartridge. You take this axle out, you take these bolts out, you can change the limited slip, ramp angles, and everything right here. So that was quick and easy. The question, of course, is what am I worried about the most? What will go wrong? Well, the problem is I don't know. Not all of this, it should work, but every bit of this has not been done, not been tested, not been tried. It's like you're going to ask me, it's not like the AMX. The AMX, every system needed to be re-engineered. The engines have been reliable. The drivetrain, from what I understand, was very reliable. The suspension is reliable. The wiring, the computer, that's all, likely to be right. I'm sure we'll find a couple little electrical problems we didn't see. I'm sure there'll be a couple little things. But the problem is, will all these individual reliable components all work together? And what is it that we don't know? That's why I do this. I love this stuff. I tell people I'm going to make an old car that was never reliable. I'm going to pick up parts from sources that have never been tried, that I don't know. And I'm like the only one that has ever seen one of these complete. And there's stuff that I'd never seen because I tried to get those parts. I had pictures, grainy pictures of these parts going, this is what I need. But I don't know. So it's kind of a fun project because I'm a mechanic by trade. I love to solve problems. I like challenges. This is a good challenge. And plus it's meaningful to me because this was my old car. And the fact that I spent so much money, I lost so much money, it pretty much crushed me financially. I sold it to a guy, pretty much crushed him financially. He sold it to another guy. This thing has been a project car, and I say it pretty much ruined 3 people already. So I'm very interested in seeing this completed.